I don't post often. I've been playing Elden Ring, and I really enjoy the game. And as a writer, as many of you know, for Golden Tree Publishing, I write comic books. And I think the writing in this and the storytelling is fantastic. Most of it is done through the gameplay. And I really enjoyed the lore videos for the people who have really dug deep into the game to give us some great answers to questions that we have about the lands between. One of the videos I haven't seen a lot of is what exactly is the lands between. And I wanted to kind of address that in this video. Very briefly, my theory on what the lands between is and where it is. In context of its location. Some people have tied it to Dark Souls and some of these other games. I think one viewer or YouTuber put it that it's kind of like this is the top of some of the other worlds of the other games, but I don't think that's what it is at all. And I think one of the things that I like to bring to attention is just by starting with the different classes of which you're able to select within the game. You will see that some of these classes seem to come from inside the lands between, and some seem to come from outside the lands between. The warrior seemingly to be essentially a part of those banished tarnished who had left with the first Elden Lord and were stripped of their grace. And then you have the aristocrats who seem to be from the lands between, as well as the loner. The northerner can be seen as from the lands between, but I think that the northerners are from somewhere north of the lands between. So not the snow tops or the mountaintops or the giants, that area, but from somewhere above that. The seafarer, I think, would be obvious that they are actually not from the lands between. The Reedlander as well. There's no land of reeds. We've explored the lands between at this point, and there's nothing there. The Draconians would seem to be descendants of someone ancient within the lands between, probably serving the dragon lords of past. And then the night folk, who I think are the most interesting. I'm going to do a separate video on them. And then of course the notorious Newman, of which America is a descendant of, are and is explicitly stated as they are not from the lands between. And so now that we know this information about these different entities, with some being from the lands between and some not being from the lands between, we can look at this map and we see that the map is just a map of the lands between. There's no hard cutoff. There's no on the edges of the map. The map kind of ends, but you can tell that it would continue, right? It would continue on. And if you look, of course, underneath the lands between, which I think is considered not the lands between based on the different story elements of the game, then what you have is, most notably to me, is then when you look at this map, FromSoft didn't leave much to chance. They were very meticulous in where they place things within the Lord of the Rings game. I mean, Lord of the Rings game, yeah. The Elden Ring game. But I can tell you my mindset right now. The ships here, this ship you can see is sailing into the lands between. From outside the lands between. And if you go up to the right where the mountaintops of the giants is, there is a ship sailing away from the lands between. There's another ship to the north which also seems to be sailing away from the lands between. Notice none of these ships are going up and down the coast, transporting. It's not like soldiers of Godric are sailing, up and down the coast. To me, that indicates that there are other lands outside the lands between, other continent masses that aren't essentially blessed by the greater will or any of the other gods, in fact. And if you look at different fiction like the Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, and many other fantasy titles, you'll notice that a lot of these titles have a similar theme in that they're something like Berserk from Kintaro as well. there is a land or island that is sacred or blessed and essentially is run or inhabited by the gods. Now, like in Lord of the Rings, there's like one big god who basically had offspring, and those offspring created elves and dwarves and things on Middle Earth, but they resided on another island where the elves eventually go at the end to usher in the Age of Man in Lord of the Rings. And I think we're dealing with something similar here with Elden Ring, and that this is the coveted land of the gods, the many gods. We know that there are multiple, and that the Elden Ring itself must hold some power that was not created by the Greater Will, because we know that the Elden Ring is in fact existing before the Greater Will ever came, held by the Dragon Lords. And in fact, one of the Dragon Lords, Placidusax, was considered an Elden Lord. So the Greater Will is more involved with things like the Light of Grace and the Tarnished. And it almost seems like it is a newer entity into the playing and jockeying for position within the lands between, where non-mortal beings exist in abundance, if you really think about it. From dragons to the godskin, to the snake that Rykard let eat him, and so on and so forth. And so I think the name is literal in essence for the lands between, and that is, it is a land between all other lands. And so this land is sacred, and without a blessing from one of the outer gods, you cannot enter. Hence, when the Tarnished were stripped of the Light of Grace and banished by America to suffer in outside the lands between, they believe they literally left the lands between. They were sent away to another continent where they would exist essentially as mere mortals and beings who would live and die. And then she would bring them back after they essentially learned many things from this process, by the Elden Ring essentially giving them the Light of Grace back, bringing back many of the Tarnished to the lands between to exact whatever plan you decide you're going to do when you play the game, because there are many endings. And so I just wanted to touch on that, on where the lands between is and what it is. And again, I think it's literally in the name, lands between, and it's the land between all other lands, essentially the land most coveted by the gods. And the gods are essentially at play, fighting each other for control over not only the lands between, but also if you think about it, also the Elden Ring. Some gods would like to hold the Elden Ring for power, and some seem to want to destroy the Elden Ring, in many ways, that the way some people would want to destroy something very powerful so that no one could have it. And I just wanted to touch on that. So when you're playing as one of these characters, you could be playing as a character from outside the lands between, who was then blessed by grace after many times, essentially descendants of the Tarnished who have returned, or the Tarnished themselves who have been resurrected, to return to the lands between, to either join America or fight against America in the Greater Will, or join the Greater Will, or the Frenzied Flame, or the Fell God, whatever path you choose. And that is my theory on that. If you like these lore videos and want to see more, just let me know in the comments section and I will do so. And please leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe. Thank you.